this week's episode, we are going to cover, I think, slightly deeper subject, but a very important one, and that is taming the ego. That's not to say that the ego is a bad thing and needs to be putting it back in its box, because actually, in reality, it both serves us and can hinder us if not kept under control. We all have experiences where our ego, either consciously and probably most unconsciously, starts to take over, and we start saying things and doing things, not necessarily from an aspect of kindness, compassion, love, but we're doing it to protect ourselves. So having an awareness that our ego is actually quite a healthy thing, but important to recognize that left untamed, it can start to show up in ugly ways. And that is what we're going to talk about. So strap yourself in.
Yeah,
because,
we're going deep.
This could be a little bit confronting. And I suspect at times anyone listening to this might be wanting to argue against it. And if you hear yourself saying, well, that's all very well, but pause.
Reflect.
And ask yourself, is that your ego coming out already, trying to defend yourself?
Yeah, it'd be interesting to observe where the mind goes as we go through this episode.
Exactly. That's a really good phrase, actually. So, where is your mind going?
Yeah. So we're going to cover, well, first of all, I guess the first thing to explore is, what is the ego? What is this thing that we're referring to? We'll look at the positive and maybe more challenging aspects of our egos and how they might display themselves. We'll look at the role of ego in leadership, and then look at some simple strategies to actually keep that ego in check and make sure it doesn't get in the way of our relationships and what we do at work.
In fact, you raise a point there that actually that is probably one of the bigger outcomes and the reason for listening to this podcast today, because I really do believe, I think we both believe this, that it will make you a better leader, a better parent, a better friend, a better partner. There's no question at all that, I know I'm speaking from my own experience. They're doing a lot of work on ego through some of the sort of spiritual development programs I've done. It's definitely made me a kinder, more compassionate person.
Absolutely. I think when you...
Well, you're agreeing with me, are you?
You are definitely a kinder, more compassionate. Still some work to do. But, if you listen to this podcast...
But that's a fair point. I mean, you've known me a long time.
But we're all work in progress, aren't we?
Yeah.
And I think that it's not until... probably really, in my respect, the last, maybe 5 or 10 years that I've really even understood and appreciated the role of the ego and how that impacts my motivation and my response to certain situations. So it's going to be really interesting to delve into this, because I think it's something it's not something that a lot of people consciously think about.
Now, neither of us are psychologists.
No.
But we do work in this field a lot. And I know from my own, to that point, that it's not something necessarily, it's a go-to subject. We go in a lot of other developmental type programs. We probably wouldn't readily sign up for a Taming the Ego retreat or program.
No.
However, if anyone listening to this has done any kind of really deep personal development, I would suggest to you, and I'm talking about beyond leadership here, I'm talking about sort of real deep personal development of self, really looking at self. You simply cannot do that without actually looking at ego.
And actually, the reason why you might not sign up for that is probably your ego wouldn't want you to.
Definitely, ego does not want you to reveal that aspects of itself to yourself.
But it links quite closely, doesn't it, to some of the other episodes that we've done on, people pleasing, even imposter syndrome that you maybe wouldn't expect, and vulnerability.
Yeah.
they're all very closely linked. So we'll bring some of those back as we go
It's a
through.
fuel. Let's think about, it is what are the you looked up some definition. Do you want to read it out, Lisa, the definition of the psychologist? Because probably a bit of too much to remember. Whilst we're not psychologists, we have spent a lot of time reading and digesting. And, certainly for me, some 30 years now. And I did do a lot of work on myself in my 20s, and I continued to doing that work in my 30s and have done since. But a lot of that real deep stuff I probably did, quite a few years ago.
Yeah, yeah.
And I have to say, it is amongst the most profound work that I've done. And then about 10 years ago, maybe under 10 years ago, I started to study Kabbalah, which some people might be aware of, ancient Jewish mysticism, and it was a kind of inflection point in my life. And again, did a lot of work on understanding the ego. What do the psychologists say about it?
So the general psychological definition, and I will read it out because it's quite long. So the general psychological definition of the ego is the part of a person's mind that is responsible for self-awareness, self-control, and rational thinking. So it's the sense of self or identity, and it's often referred to as self-esteem or self-image, which totally makes sense.
It's interesting that it's responsible for self-awareness, but quite often we are unaware of it.
Yeah, it shapes our sense of the world and how we fit in. I think,
how you feel you fit in to it.
Yeah. And so...
Certainly shapes your identity.
Yeah. And so the judgments you may make about that might provoke certain behaviours that are motivated by your ego, not maybe your true sense of self.
And those judgments that we might, make of others is based on our understanding of what is right and wrong. And that judgment of what is right and wrong in others is where the ego can rear up.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to give this a bad rap because without it, who would we be?
It's like a compass, isn't it?
How do we know how to act and behave?
Yeah.
So often when we use the word ego, we immediately assume it has a very sort of fairly negative connotation. You don't necessarily bestow a compliment on somebody. So you've got a very healthy ego.
Yeah, good job on the ego.
Yeah, good job on the ego. Yeah. However, the positive aspect to it is that it does drive a desire to perform.
Yeah.
Preparing for a meeting, preparing for a presentation, making sure you do a good job at work, making sure that someone asks you to do something, they feel satisfied, whatever that is. If you're, it's a sense of worth, isn't it? I mean, you don't want to... So the ego is driving a positive performance. That's why a lot of really good performers, they come wrapped up with quite a healthy ego.
Yeah, and that ego develops over time, doesn't it? So you learn, how to navigate the world through the way you are parented. So if you've got a very strong attachment style, then you are much more likely to have a very secure and stable ego. If you had a slightly less stable upbringing, then you are likely to have a less stable ego that might show itself in less positive ways.
I can certainly identify with having a relationship with my mother which was not that great. So, love was quite a difficult thing to come by. I wasn't kind of like the coolest kid at school, so you didn't get a lot of immediate I wasn't particularly good at sport. Yeah. Enthusiastic footballer, absolutely hopeless. So, you don't fit in. You're not quite sort of slotting into the mainstream or one of the guys. Mother certainly didn't. Secretly behind closed doors would talk me up, but never to me. Always sort of kept me down.
So to others, she would talk you up.
I would hear it through other people, but not through her. And so when I started to achieve some sort of level of success in my life, of course, the ego then comes out and it's really enjoying this newfound respect. See, check me out. And sadly, it got a bit ahead of me.
But do you think,
for a time.
So do you think that the lack of positive attention, for want of a better word, made you seek that.
Totally.
Well, I guess once you had a taste of it, then you sought more and more of it.
And wanted more acknowledgement.
Yeah, and behaved in line with
Yeah.
things that you knew would get
Yeah.
attention from
And then
others.
kind of made sure that people knew that I was doing that thing and I
Yeah.
was getting that attention and repeat it to people.
Yeah.
Just so they know, hey, check me out, look at this.
And
you
that's
know?
interesting, isn't it? Because I've never thought of you as a people pleaser. But another way that could have shown itself, is in people pleasing tendencies, isn't it? If you feel that the service of others and putting needs of others first gets you positive attention from people, then you are more likely to do those people pleasing behaviours. In your example, though, yours was to display very confident, look what I can achieve for myself type behaviours. So there's potentially, two ways it could go, isn't there?
But it was particularly to people that, to me, mattered. In other words, I obviously wanted my mother to know that I was doing well.
Yeah.
And I wanted I was seeking her approval, right? So anyone who was held in a position of authority,
Yes.
that's the person I'd want to impress.
Yeah.
And, would make sure that they would see that I was achieving that. Of course, how old was I? Probably, 22, 23, 24, something like that. I wasn't really aware that I was doing that.
Yeah.
I mean, to give you an example, I remember I became very successful in sales.
Yeah.
Fairly early in my 20s, having sort of struggled a bit. And suddenly I've got this, skill and doing really well. And I bought my first Mercedes. I was like so proud of this. So proud. I mean, it was a 190E, I think it was. So it was just going back a few years, right? But I was like, it was a shiny, beautiful silver Mercedes, the little thing on the front there on the bonnet. It was like, oh my goodness me, this is brilliant, right? So what's the first thing I do? Get in my car on my first day and I go straight over to my mother's house, right? She wasn't there when I arrived, so I'm waiting outside eagerly for her to arrive. She gets out of her car, takes one look at me, takes one look at the car, says absolutely nothing, and walks straight past me into the house.
Gutted.
Gutted beyond belief. Fuck's sake, come on. Surely now, come on. Hey, look at what your son's done.
Wow.
Come on, look, check this out, right? Oh, I was so gutted. Wounded child followed her down the pathway. All right, head slightly tucked forward.
Wait, but look at my car.
She's probably thinking there is no way I'm giving you a scrap of recognition for that.
But she would go and then tell her mates.
But she'd go and tell her friends. Yeah. But now I know what I know.
Yeah.
It's all to do with her.
Yeah.
That's her ego passing it on to me.
Absolutely.
I never got recognition. There's no way I'm going to let you have any recognition. So that's the ugly side of it.
Yeah.
But you're passing it on. So,
and it's quite interesting, isn't it? In both of the examples, so the people pleasing tendency or the seeking validation from others. They're very external methods of motivation, aren't they? You're not doing things that for intrinsic motivation. It's very external, which is it's a very risky strategy.
Yeah.
And Brené Brown in her work, she says that the ego has a very positive role in that it can protect us from vulnerability.
Yep.
And keeps us safe and has a very positive role, but it also prevents authentic connection because people aren't seeing the genuine version of you. They're seeing, you describe it, don't you, as a mask version of yourself.
Yeah. Helpful hinder. Is it being helpful or is it hindering you? There are, as we said, pains to point out there are some positive aspects, as you said, to protect you, to keep you in a positive light, to
help you navigate social hierarchies, to help you understand how to behave in certain situations, to know your, give you a strong sense of identity. There's loads of positive aspects, but it's like you were referring to earlier. If left untamed, that's when the more negative sides
kind of
can come
things show up when it's hindering us. What are some of those behaviours that then show up?
I think if you're challenged, so if you have a point of view and it's challenged, then that can lead to defensiveness if you allow your ego to drive your response.
There's certainly a lack of empathy.
Yeah.
Or it's a lack of willingness to want to really understand somebody and understand, where they're coming from. You're kind of almost blind to or don't want to go there. You're not willing to step into their world and experience what they're experiencing.
Yeah. And you're assuming that your ego assumes that your view of the world is how sometimes others should be behaving. So if you're in a situation where, you're in conflict with somebody else, that's when the ego can come out, can't it? If they're challenging you, you can get really defensive because your sense of self-worth is being challenged. And if they're not conforming to your way of the world and the way you view the world, which comes from your ego, that can lead to escalation in conflict.
I remember talking to one of these sort of spiritual teachers once, and I was asking him about why is it sometimes that I find it difficult or don't have a lot of patience for people who are being, in my view, very weak, being a bit pathetic.
Is that true?
Right.
Never seen that.
Come on, pull your socks up, for goodness sake, what's the matter with you?
Yeah.
And there's probably still a bit of that element of me now. I have to sort of just rein it in and go, hold on, let's be a bit more empathic here.
Yeah.
But what he was saying, again, that it's a reflection of self, right? So what aspect of yourself don't you like? And the aspect of myself I don't like is my weakness. So I didn't like being weak. I wanted the opposite. I wanted to be strong. I wanted to be confident. And I hated that part of myself that was just, weak and felt just not inadequate. So, of course, when I see that behaviour in other people is triggering the bit I don't like in myself, which is an important lesson. We've talked about this before. The things we don't like in others are actually residing in you. That's how you know to get annoyed, angry, upset,
because otherwise you wouldn't have
impatient.
A label or a way of feeling about that.
Again, is that part of us that we're less conscious of. Even when my children were growing up, if they were being too weak about something. I remember once trying to help my son fly a kite. Right? We all know what that's like as parents, trying to fly a kite. You hold one end, I'll go out here, you let go of it, and the thing gets tangled up. And,
within seconds.
All right, within seconds. And I'm running backwards and forwards, and I'm trying to get this thing up in the air. Then he starts crying. And rather than me going, I'm sure you're upset, I'm starting getting upset with him about crying, right? I remember it because I just after the moment passed, I just felt so guilty for being impatient with his weakness, and rather than being, kinder and more compassionate. And I would chastise myself for it afterwards. Yeah. But that was the ego untamed right there, right? It's an untamed ego. It's rearing up.
An unconscious response to that situation. I mean, it's a bit like, if a child is acting up in a supermarket or something like that, you're at pains quickly to quieten them down because you don't want to be seen as, bad parent or, disrupting other people or whatever. But actually a much faster route to calming the situation is to be compassionate, isn't it?
Yeah.
But not always easy.
Yeah. But certainly for me in that circumstance, it is slightly different to that point, that it was it was the weakness in me that I'm seeing in him that I don't like. And I'm getting annoyed with it. Yeah. So that was a really important point for me to sit with and understand and to tame that part of ourselves and to understand it. It is a part of it, accepting that we're all brought into this world, with the best guides we can have at the time. Those guides aren't always well equipped. My mother, I don't think, was particularly well equipped and went on to a life of, and I'm not having a bit of a gripe here, but it wasn't that great at all.
Yeah.
I mean, we've got 5 siblings, and I don't think any of us had the best relationship with her at all, even if we're talking about her today. Yeah. Sadly, she passed away quite some number of years ago, cancer, and I've often felt the tortured angry life she had inside her, I don't think was particularly helpful in potentially manifesting that.
Probably never had the tools to reflect.
But there's again, when you get to a place of understanding and maturity, and you're not looking at your parents when you're in a younger years and going, "Oh, let me understand why you're this way." You're just angry at them for being that way.
Yeah.
But she was being the best guide she could be at the time. And there was just some good qualities I certainly have taken from her.
Yeah.
Just realising these, or come to the realisation of these things over time enables you to not continue behaving that way in the future.
And not passing that on to your own
And not passing
kids.
it on,
It
indeed,
can stop with you. But what, you said you, in your early career, you could see those sorts of things, the ego-driven behaviours rearing. At what point did you understand or start to understand what was going on and realising actually that was a pattern you couldn't continue if you wanted to be successful?
Well, it's a good question. And the reality is the last thing your ego wants is to see those ego traits, right? One of my teachers sort of rather jokingly said, it's much easier to spot when someone else stinks.
Okay.
Right, which I thought, is quite amusing. So you can spot it in someone else, but you're not so necessarily willing to spot it in yourself or even be open to it.
Yeah.
Because that's the job of the ego. In a sort of spiritual sense, if anybody's done any sort of spiritual teaching, you will know on one side you've got the light, right? The whatever you want to call it, the creator, the light energy. And then on the other side, you call it like the opponent or the darkness. It's the shadow behaviors, the bit you don't want to see, or the bit that it's the kind of opposite of all that is great and good, whatever you want to describe it as. And then that other part of us that we're fighting with all the time. This is certainly from the sort of Kabbalah teaching that I did, it took me a little while to get used to this idea whilst I'd been kind of brought up in a Christian family and went to church quite regularly. We talk about God and the devil and, that sort of thing. But whatever your predisposition is to religion or spirituality or whatever, the reality is, depending on what your beliefs are around this, if we think about it from a kind of natural life source, your natural self, your uncluttered, purest love, absolutely purest love, right? It's even when it comes down to choosing food, that's the right food to have. It's the wrong food to have.
Yeah.
It's the opponent.
Yeah.
It's challenging you.
Yeah.
This would be a nice thing to say, but can I be asked to say it to him or her? No, why should I?
Yeah.
Why should I? Right,
Yeah.
so that is the opponent. That's fighting against you.
It's interesting, actually, because in his book, Ryan Holiday, the book Ego is the Enemy, he calls it the fight against your greatest opponent.
There you go. Right, exactly. That's exactly it.
Yeah.
Exactly. A fight against your greatest opponent is exactly it. So in answer to your question, it took some time.
Yeah.
Right? Because, here I am, becoming more and more successful, enjoying the adulation that I was deprived of, never ever received. Suddenly finding my place in the world. I've gone from being extremely unpopular school kid, but not the cool kid, to suddenly got the money, I've got a bit of swagger, I'm getting the attention from, the opposite sex, etc.
Yeah.
And it's the classic thing going to your head a bit.
And it does lead to sort of you against everyone else type energy, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Which unchecked can lead to isolation because everyone thinks you're an arsehole.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you become ugly.
Yeah.
You become ugly.
Yeah. So the very thing that you're craving, you actually start attracting the opposite attention.
Start attracting the opposite and you start pushing it away. I think the sort of programs and things that I did, I was always committed, as you've heard me talk about before, always committed to personal development.
Yeah.
And I would put myself on these programs because I wanted to, get better. But I think a lot of my desire to do that was to perform better, not necessarily to be a better person.
No, but to get more
to succeed more.
Yeah.
Then I find myself on this program, which I thought was about getting more, all right? And it wasn't. It was about being a better person. So I was confronted.
The revelation.
And suddenly there is this, oh my goodness me, this is really hard.
Yeah.
All right? Really hard and really confronting. Because here I am, I'm being super confident. And I remember this guy said, can we just take all the showmanship out of the way for a second and just talk to me, just be a bit more real?
Yeah.
What do you mean? Well, I'm being real. No, you're not. All right? So we got this.
Interesting.
Yeah, it was tough. And of course, I tried to defend it and, blah, blah, blah. So those are the early stages of really suddenly realising, stop being a jerk.
Yeah.
Stop being an idiot. Calm yourself down. You don't need to be this way. You're not being particularly compassionate and nice to people.
And you're definitely not being authentic.
I would be nice, but I would be nice sometimes, not necessarily for all the right reasons. And I was doing it for popularity.
Yeah. But it's interesting because I think, maybe a slightly different manifestation, but actually I think, a very similar story for me as well. I was very motivated to get that external attention, but my route to it was by people pleasing and putting everybody first, thinking I was being nice and, doing good in the world and putting needs, others' needs ahead of myself. But it was all for external motivation, which over-exercise, that ends, you can only put others first for so long before it actually makes you feel worthless, and it was actually you very subtly delivered it to me, or I think you sort of did it as a bit of a suggestion to actually open my eyes to the fact that you think that someone people pleases is low ego and someone that was outwardly confident is more egotistical. But actually the same motivation is at play whether you're people pleasing or you're a showman. It's a vulnerability, isn't it, that can isolate you actually from the very thing that you want. And that's why I think it's so powerful when people really challenge that and reflect on the motivation for their actions.
What you have done there is there's that little extra bit of awareness. Then you can decide when you're trying to please somebody whether you're doing it from a place of ego or true self. That's kind of, one's very personality led, ego led, feel good, I want to feel good. The other is I'm doing this because it's really what I want to do.
Yeah.
One of the other key concepts, certainly in Kabbalah, is this, it's called sort of when you are giving to receive, or when you are giving for the benefit of the other person alone. When you're giving to receive, you're doing something to get something back. Yes. That's the ego.
Yeah. So
that's
your motivation is to get something for yourself.
So in all the teachings I went through, and I did this for a couple of years. So it was quite, a long study and a lot of introspection. It would make you more conscious of when you're making decisions and what you're saying, even in a sort of social conversation. Are you doing this for your own benefit or are you doing it for them? So giving purely for the benefit of the other person with no hint of reciprocation. You are purely doing it because it is good for the other person. Yeah. And you're not doing it to receive some benefit or receive some, positive comment back or thank you or you've been great. That is amazing you've done that, Lisa. It's amazing you've done that, Martin. Oh, that's really fantastic. Telling stories about yourself, about things that you've done for other people, and recount, now I've done that, I can tell people I've done it. Yeah. You see.
That's a clue.
Or even in the moment, you could be agreeing with somebody in the moment, but you don't believe in what they're saying.
It's funny you should
because you're doing it for approval.
Yeah, because Jay Shetty in his book Think Like a Monk, he says if you use your own gifts in true service of others, then you can free yourself from your ego.
Lovely. Very nice.
And I think that it's in true service of others with no, exactly
that is spiritual teaching right there. That is exactly what I'm talking about. I think that the next level of development in business will be more along these lines.
Yeah.
It will, we know positive, negative behaviors and leadership. We go through all these things, but actually the really best programs dare to go into these areas, like that statement there. Maybe a way of thinking about where your ego does come into play. Because if you're sitting there listening to this and you're thinking, does this really apply to me? Is this really happening to me? I would just ask anyone listening to this to think about those moments that really bother you. Where are those moments that really bother you? And I'm not talking about, something which is clearly obvious. Someone's done something really, it's not the sort of thing that someone's completely let you down. I'm not, that bothers me. I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about certain behaviours at work.
Yeah.
I didn't like her tone of voice. Didn't like she did that. I don't like the way that she or he stepped in and took responsibility.
Or the way that was communicated to me. But it might...
Why are they asking me that question? And all these sorts of things. Who does she think she is? Who does he think he is? Those sorts of things, particularly at work and maybe in the home as well. If you can stop and ask yourself, what is it that's bothering me about that? You don't need to necessarily just keep introspecting, and see if there's a pattern. Because you're going to end up with different situations, but suddenly realising that actually what is triggering you in those situations is something to do with your ego. Your ego's being triggered.
And you have to be really honest with yourself, don't you? Because your ego will try and protect itself.
This is the big challenge. As I said before, the ego doesn't want to reveal to you.
Yeah.
It's trying to keep it in the shadow. It's the opponent. It's a very, I just grapple with that kind of idea that you've got this part of you that actually wants to be bad. But there is a part of there is an energy in you that wants sometimes to be a bit spiteful, that wants to be a bit angry, that wants to, fight back. That is the opponent. That if you in that moment can suppress that feeling and stop, you're actually healing and taming the ego right in that moment. Yeah,
and you're opening yourself, revealing it's much more relaxing, isn't it, to be your true self than rather have to act at the mercy of your ego because of external gratification.
Exactly, yeah.
I mean, the interesting thing as well is that I think it was the American Psychological Association, they did a survey and 64% of leaders that they surveyed said that their ego had a negative impact on their performance. So it's, an interesting thing to explore. How does ego show up in terms of leadership behaviours?
I think we've all experienced at some point in our life being led by a leader who has a slightly larger than required or likeable ego. And that will show up with them wanting, either taking control. It could be taking the credit or not giving you, or worse still, not actually, giving you the credit for things you've deserved.
It could cloud decision making, couldn't it? Because if you need to satisfy your need to be right, then you could pursue a decision that, and not take in the opinions of other people because it has to be from your own.
Has to be from you, or you're not open to other.
Yeah.
You get so caught up in wanting people to go with your own idea that you stop listening to the possibility of other people's ideas. You're so, it's like, no, I think I actually want to stick with my original thought, and you're driving your own agenda.
Yeah.
Because you want to get your own way.
Yeah.
Look, I think a way of answering this question is actually to do a little exercise, and this is not just if you're a leader, but obviously it's a little bit easier to answer if you're a leader. But it's the way that, if you think about this, the way that you show up generally. For the convenience, if we sort of think about the sort of 4 often talked about leadership styles.
Yeah.
So more autocratic, a tendency to take control, drive the agenda, and be in control, right? If we think about a more laissez-faire style of leadership, so
relaxed,
much passive, hands-off, relaxed, let you get on, do what you want to do, That would be like a second style. Thirdly, maybe a bit more of a sort of a buddy style. So you're kind of befriending people, staying friendly with them, very strong on keeping those relationships in a sort of friendly sort of manner. I tend to like to lead in a friendly sort of way and sort of buddy relationships with everybody. And then lastly, more of a delegating style.
Yeah.
So handing off responsibility to other people, asking other people to take, on roles, as the name suggests, delegating to people. So we've got autocratic, we've got laissez-faire, we've got this sort of buddy-friendly style and delegation.
Yeah.
So the question is, when you think about those 4 styles, which of them would you say best describes you? This is the exercise that we did. And I would suggest that people do. Which of those would you say that you would describe you best, and the reason, key question, the reason why you lead that way?
So, for example, if it was a buddy style that you most closely associate with, you might say, because I think you get the best out of people when people are happy and you have strong relationships and strong trust and
exactly.
that sort of thing.
The best way to lead people, Lisa, I don't believe in bossing people around.
Yeah.
I want to stay people's friends. I want to be friendly with them. I think you get the best out of them that way. These are the sorts of reasons that people would come up. So the idea is you think about why you lead in that way. So that would be an example. If it was autocratic, it would be probably more along the lines, well, it's not that I want to boss people around, of course, but I just want to make sure I'm in control. I've got responsibility. I want to make sure I deliver.
This is the right way to do it.
This is the right way to do it. Let's not, I've been here before. I know how to do it. Listen to me. Follow these rules. Follow this, and there is a tendency to want to, maybe a little bit more top down, potentially a little bit more micromanaging. Because you're controlling all the variables, right? So that might be some of the sort of flavour of that style. Laissez-faire is far more passive.
So
let people find their own way.
Yeah.
I'll just give you a few instructions and you go and work it out yourself. And, I prefer to... This is the sort of thing. I prefer people to go and find out their own way of doing things, and they can get their own learning. They will discover for themselves. I believe in people's potential. They're all positive intentions. Delegating would be definitely an opportunity for people to
play to strengths in a team. And utilise talents.
I'm passing on responsibility to people. I'm giving them an opportunity to grow in those areas where perhaps they could do with some development in their own confidence, or simply, I believe in this person, let them get on with it. Let them do it. And, I believe in other people taking accountability and responsibility.
Yeah.
Think about
positive things.
All positive things. And actually true. I'm not discounting them. I'm not saying they're not right. They've all got positive intentions. But here's the rub. What you then have to think about is, are there any other reasons that you might not be aware of as to why you choose to lead that way? So when I did this exercise, we all went off and we went off for the next week or so, and we thought about it, and we wrote down our reasons, and we came back with our explanations, and people read them out. The teacher then facilitated sort of maybe proposing what might be some shadow behaviour. So what he was explaining is that when we lead with our whole self, not just our conscious self. And we're leading with, I'm consciously thinking about this, but actually I'm less conscious of another behavior. So, for example, if you were autocratic, you would give the reasons that you were stating before, but in reality, the shadow behavior of that could be, there's no way I'm going to let myself fail here. There's no way I'm looking bad here.
And so this is the sort of hidden ego.
It's the
motivation.
ego. It's the ego-driven, the shadow behavior.
Yeah.
The less conscious self is the ego. Now, I'm not going to put myself in a position where I'm going to look bad here, where there's a risk of failure. So if I control all the variables, that's not going to happen, and I will end up looking good.
Yeah.
It's just being aware of what is driving driving that behavior.
Yeah.
So in those moments when you're taking control from somebody, they could be doing it themselves, you just ask yourself, well, why am I really doing this?
Yeah, why am I metaphorically standing over them? And in the body example, then, you may say that you think you get the best out of people when you have strong, trusting relationships, or the shadow behavior might come from an ego-driven desire to be accepted or not rejected or liked.
And to avoid confrontation.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
I don't want to challenge this person. And you do find this, I know, in my coaching conversations with people, and I really delve into it and say, what do you think is driving that behavior? Sometimes people get the feedback. They're too consensual, and they will argue, well, I like a consensual form of leadership, which is kind of what we're talking here. It's a buddy type friendship, very consensual. But in reality, they don't want to upset anybody. They don't want to confront anybody.
That's a really interesting exercise, from a leadership perspective. And I guess you can do that in, not necessarily with those 4 styles, but just generally being more aware in any interaction or anything that you're doing, to reflect on, what is my motivation for doing this? And is there a shadow motivation that I might not be consciously aware of?
So the laissez-faire, more passive style, the reason society would be let people get on with it and let them do their thing. But again, that could involve, it could be about responsibility.
It could be about not wanting to be seen as the person in charge and responsible.
Exactly.
So fear of failure.
Yeah. So there's a fear of failure that is driving this. And I don't want anybody to be thinking, oh, come on, that's not true. Oh, come on, well, surely that, that it's got a, that positive intent is good enough. It's not saying it's wrong. It's just asking yourself, what we're trying to do here is peel back the layers.
Yeah.
To uncover what's behind why you do what you do.
Yeah.
It's being prepared to step, and it's not easy. You've got to step into this and introspect and think about it. But if you want to understand more about yourself and what drives your behavior, to ensure that you're doing things from an authentic, wholesome place, of the true self, these are really good questions to ask. And finally, delegating. Are you delegating? You've got all the positive things there. There could be an abdication of responsibility.
Yeah, or not wanting to show vulnerability in lack of skills around certain things. People in your team may have a better skill set and you don't want to reveal your own weaknesses.
And potentially you don't want to be confronted again. That can creep into that. It could be because you don't actually want others to control you. So in these discussions, and these are best done in a leadership forum or a discussion, because if you can get people to be honest about it, you'll get the truth, you'll get the examples that will come out, because who knows best why they do what they do when they really think about it is that person. And when they really start thinking about it and asking the question, I've found this exercise to be really powerful. And I've done it with leadership teams, and it is very powerful.
Yeah. Very confronting, I'm sure.
Very confronting,
but very powerful. And I think, remembering that the motivation here is to be more authentic. And by being more authentic and being more yourself, you're freeing yourself, aren't you, from the need to be at the mercy of your ego. And actually, quote by Jay Shetty again, but he said, if you don't break down your ego, then life will break it for you. Because people can see, you used the example earlier. I can't remember exactly what you said, but something like seeing the stinking of other people or something.
Basically it's easier to notice than other people's smell or something like that.
So people will see it.
Smell someone
people
else.
will see it when it is your ego at play. So get there first, and reveal your true self. I mean, we did an episode previously on vulnerability, the power of vulnerability in leadership. It's just so powerful, isn't it? When you can be your true, vulnerable, confident when you're confident, but authentic self.
It is the ultimate confidence, because what you are appearing to see is someone who is confident.
Yeah.
But often that confidence, overconfidence, is covering up everything you've just been talking about, the vulnerability.
Yeah.
So true confidence, really true confidence, you can really see this in people when they can laugh at themselves, when they can admit their weaknesses, they can admit their frailties, they can admit their mistakes.
When they ask for help.
They can put their hand up, they ask for help. They're not trying to be all things to all people.
They let go of the need for control.
Yeah, it's so freeing. It's so freeing. I went to this program once and they did this exercise. It was a very deep, sort of enlightening. It had this really great name, and unfortunately I can't remember at the top of my head now. But the teacher was a guy called Justice Barrymore, of all names.
Very good name.
Right?
Not Michael Barrymore, not to be confused.
No, not to be confused. He kind of used the metaphor of a castle. And he said, if you think about yourself as a castle and you come up to the castle wall, what is that wall there for? That wall is to protect something on the inside of the castle. So when the door is opened, the bit you reveal to others initially is this initial mask. You're not revealing any part of yourself you don't want people to see.
Yeah.
You're putting your best foot forward, shiny, positive, glossy, look at me, aren't I great, I'm okay, etc. If you're successful in getting through the castle wall, you then get to the next level. And you can see where we're going here.
Yeah.
We get to the next level. So what's the next level? So the exercise we went through is, what is the bit you let people see? What's the first bit? Be honest about that. Once they've got past that bit, what is it you're now willing to let people see? And how do you show up to the world? And I think there's a sort of male-female thing. He talked a lot about how we learn this from our mother and from our father. Yeah. Too long to explain now, but there's a definite link there between what we learn from our male role models, etc., and our female role models. And then finally you get to the inner workings of the castle, which is metaphorically your inner child. And your inner child is your absolute purest, egoless self. Yeah. So when the exercise we wrote out is, when I'm with my mask, I do X. When I'm with X, I do this. And when I'm with my inner child, I am, and you finish that sentence, kind, loving, and compassionate. And I remember being on this program and people going through this process. And by the way, this is not a 5-minute exercise. He would talk for a couple of hours in the morning and then say, right, I want you to go away and ask yourself the question, who are you when you're with your mask? That's it. See you in 3 hours. I'm in this beautiful Austrian mountain. We'd all go wandering off into the woods and sit up and look at the sunrise, sunset, etc., meditating and thinking about this. It was pretty deep. And people come back. You can imagine there's a lot of tears, a lot of kind of people really having this moment where there's this realization that they don't need to be a certain way. Yeah. And that, there's a lot of self-love and a lot of sort of, and there's a lot of people identifying with each other. Very, very powerful.
There must be a bit of, because that's how you've learnt to behave over sometimes a very long period of time. So there must be a little bit, mourning that sense of identity and, revealing, having the confidence to reveal your true self. Yeah. I can imagine that's incredibly powerful.
Well, there was a one night for me when I woke up at about 5:30 in the morning, 5:30 a.m. I just could not stop crying. I mean, unlike nothing ever I've experienced. I just couldn't believe it. I was incredibly upset.
And did you know why?
And I was trying to work it out. I just walked out and I sort of found one of the facilitators, and she sat me down and spoke to me, and I told her about these dreams I'd had, and the dreams were very much centered around shame, right? As feeling shameful. And she described it, and I'm sure other people listening to this have maybe been similar things. They call it the dark night of the soul. It's like this suddenly reveal of this part of you. I mean, here is me in absolute, I have absolute tears and physically shaking. Gosh. And a lot of the other people were quite disappointed they didn't get the same experience, right? But it's doing the heavy work. It was a very, very powerful experience. And that's why I'm so passionate about this, that I don't foresee anytime soon as being on leadership courses and having quite this experience. But I really would like to see us introducing more of these subjects into leadership development and personal development. And I do think we're reaching that point. I think we're reaching a point where we are having a much greater understanding of well-being, people being much more open and appreciative of your point around being appreciative of people's differences, appreciative of people's upbringing, and the willingness to create psychological safety for people to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
Hugely powerful.
And I think just, if one takeaway from this that people can practice, is just to have that awareness, isn't it? And really just reflect on the motivation for the things that you're doing day to day, and try and be honest with yourself about some of those potential shadow behaviours and how that actually impacts your behaviour.
Let the ego reveal itself.
Yeah.
That's it. And then you can tame it.
Yeah.
Can't tame something you can't see. So, yeah, good luck with this. It's not easy work, but it's very powerful work. And it will give you the greatest level of development ever, in my experience.
Yeah.
Really,
and it's
it really
a journey,
does.
isn't it?
It is a journey, yeah.
It's a continuous journey. I reflect on this a lot and really try and think about the underlying motivation, because it's easy to look at the surface level. It's harder to go deep, but it does reap rewards.
Excellent. Well, look, as always, be prepared to share this with other people and keep it to yourself. Don't be selfish. You might be thinking, I don't want to share this with my husband, wife, partner, leader. They might find out a little bit more and they go, that's you. Well, share it with them.
Well,
There's
that's your ego
there.
not what
That's
is.
your ego there, you see.
Yeah.
Don't keep it to yourself. So what we got coming up next?
So the next episode, we've got a very special guest coming in, and we're going to be looking at the balance of success with sanity, a session around the very important topic of maintaining mental health and wellness, particularly in the corporate environment.
Yes, Artemis is absolutely fantastic, and you will thoroughly enjoy that. So until next time, as always, keep powering up and having these breakthroughs. Bye for now.